You got that?
Oh, that guy pushed me. Oh God, I have 16 health. No. No.
Hello, welcome to the latest episode of NP React, when we react to latest news from Ashes of Creation, which is a fantastic MMO that we're all very much looking forward to playing, and it's not going to disappoint us in any way. I'm joined by Narys, my good friend, who is the leader of the Hand of Unity community. Narys, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Palmer.
Good.
I must admit I've been a bit of a disappointment this time because I haven't got the face cam set up, but
Yes.
all will be revealed for the cleric reveal at the end of the month, so don't worry, it will be there.
We're finally going to see your face, which is going to be quite a treat for our viewers. But today we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about the ranged combat reveal. We're going to look at ranged combat in Ashes of Creation because they've shown us some nice footage of that. And we might also talk a bit about the AMA that Stephen Sharif, who is the Ashes of Creation boss, gave recently, and he revealed some quite interesting information about the game. So we'll turn the volume up in a minute. But first of all, this is the footage of the Ranger, the ranged combat. We're going to see some actual fighting soon. But at the moment, we're just seeing the graphics, what the world looks like, and I think this looks really good. I think the wind is a little bit much, but if you look at the trees in the background, the leaves that are close up, they kind of look as if they're going a bit mad. But actually, look at those trees in the background; they're swaying ever so nicely. They look really good. What do you think of the graphics and the world building that we've seen so far?
So I must admit, Palmer, that the first striking thing to me is just the actual cloak. You know, it looks so realistic. You can see the creases in it, and it just looks really spectacular. I see what you mean about the trees, though. They're kind of going a little bit mad, but no doubt that's something that they'll iron out. But overall, for an MMO, I personally think it looks spectacular, and each kind of revision looks better and better.
Yeah, and it's often the way, to be fair, that when in any game, if you look at something very close up, it doesn't look quite as good as when you see it from a distance. So GM Stephen is about to show us some combat, so we're going to turn the volume up, have a little listen, and we'll turn the volume down or pause the video when we want to say a few more words.
It's
And one
really
of the
compelling.
big goals, is to make a living, breathing world that's an actual character of our game. Vera should very much feel like a character that has so much history and story behind it. They're like great fantasy worlds of the past and other franchises. Vera should very much feel like one of those that just hearing the name invokes all kinds of history.
Yes.
You can see the ears poking out of the cloak. I think he actually mentions that at one point too, that the hood actually has holes in it for the ears to stick out, which is quite a nice little touch.
And character and living, breathing, and actually a world that's been in trouble for a long time now, and the players are coming back to help rescue and recover that.
I love it. And I also love the fact that Chris Atkins threw in some slits for this elf's ears to come through. Oh my gosh, that's so awesome.
I feel a lot comfortable. You're able to poke through.
Adorable.
They are adorable. This is such a great outfit. I'm loving the cape cloth as well. It's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you were mentioning we are in an area that is relatively dangerous, right? This is these aren't elite monsters, right? But they are still deadly.
Now, you vaguely knew, I think I must have come across him, but I think you actually knew him back when we were all playing Arcade together. And one of the weird things about Stephen, who I love, and I think we all love, is that he's actually pretty bad at playing video games. He's not a great player, so they've given him a not too hard an area, I think, to fight in. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did play some Arcade with Stephen and the White Order in the Arcade NA and EU Alpha because there was only the one server. But yeah, he's a lot of fun. He's very knowledgeable, loves some Dungeons and Dragons. And yeah, he's not always the best player, but give him his due. He does, try to improve, and he definitely does improve over time.
Yeah, I mean, they actually gave him a character to do this, which is invulnerable and can't actually die. But in fairness, that's probably the best way to show off the combat. So any minute now, if I can recall, I've seen this video once before, he's going to shoot. Here we go.
I'm walking. Oh, God. Oh, no. Wait.
Just gonna aggro this.
Oh, no.
On a few of them.
Hold on 1 second. Trad, what should I do? What items or abilities?
Spam 2 on one of them. Take that guy down. All right, that was quick shot right there. So quick shot is an ability that has 3 charges, and each shot does more damage than the last to the target that you're attacking.
So I love the way that the character did a little roll there. I mean, this is one of the things that I think a lot of people look for in the Ranger. More so than a Major. A Mage, you expect a Mage to sort of stand there and shoot out fireballs, but to sort of stand in one place while he do it often. It's not the same in every game, but with a Ranger, people look for range for a lot of movement, a lot of running around, a lot of kiting, and I love the way that he's doing that here, and also that little roll. I don't know exactly how he did that, if that's just if that's how the dodge button works or something on a Ranger, but it looks like a lot of fun actually running around and kiting the character, kiting the enemies a little bit in this.
Absolutely. I think mobility is kind of key for a good fluidic combat, and, especially when it comes to kind of PvP, but also PvE in a way, mobility and being able to move out of the way of attacks and being rewarded for positioning is always a nice thing to see.
You can kind of use it as an opener alpha strike kind of ability.
Oh, no.
Just to drop somebody.
Do I have that 2 back again, the quick shot?
Yep. Yeah, we haven't done full cooldown pass on this or anything, so you can pretty much just spam right now. But
You got that.
Oh, that guy pushed me. Oh, God, I have 16 health. No.
The shaman are not something to mess with. They've got that charge.
How did we
They've
draw?
got that
How
ability.
did I grab so many?
They're paying attention.
Okay, hold on.
yeah, playing as a ranged player, you have to be aware of your surrounding.
As a range player, you have to be aware of your surroundings. A bit of advice for Stephen. I really like the noise. If you listen to the noise when the arrow goes, it sounds really good.
I did not. I was not aware of my surroundings. Okay, you guys may notice that I'm not dying right now. And I would just like to comment that the stream would not be good if I died trying to fight these things. What am I using here, Trad?
That will be Snipe. So unlike Quick Shot, that is an ability that you can press and hold, and it kind of roots you in place. So it's you gotta like use that at the right time, but you do get a lot of payoff if you can pull off the whole thing.
So there is a bit of tactics there where you can give up your mobility for a moment in order to do it sounds like a big sort of alpha strike damage, which is quite a nice little touch in the game. Look at just look at the image here. I mean, this looks like a sort of concept art. This actually looks really, really nice, just what we're seeing here from this screenshot.
Absolutely. The bloom in the god rays, as well as the particle effects and just the kind of the shafts of sunlight. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful.
So the longer that you charge it, the more damage it does.
I need to get some of my health back. I apologize, stream. Let me just say that whenever we do these recordings and I am piloting, right, I have this very well thought out outline and plan about how things are going to go, and somehow something happens and it just doesn't work.
And
I don't know why.
It's like when Mike Tyson says everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face.
Right. Yeah. No plan survives contact with the enemy. So I turned on this cheat code, which doesn't let me die if I fall below 1 hit point. So every time you see me drop to 1 hit point, know that I would have normally just died there, and you guys can, take a shot of water or something.
Point for the Minotaur.
Yeah, point for the Minotaur. Okay, so by the way, you guys are seeing this is early morning here on the Varen Riverlands, and you'll see that there's a lot of weather effects that are happening right here. There's some pollen because we're in the middle of spring, but it's also early morning, so we have this fog layer that's rolling through. Of course,
that's fantastic.
The aesthetics of Ashes of Creation are very important. We've always said that game systems makes games fun, and the game environment and the aesthetics make it beautiful and make
That is one thing that they do seem to be doing, which is fantastic. I think at the very start of this video, the person that Stephen was speaking to talked about the importance of Vera, the world itself, sort of being a character in its own right in a way, and they've made a real effort to make it sort of change a little bit, so it's going to be different. Doesn't just get darker and lighter, it actually changes a little bit between the morning and the evening. And we've seen, of course, in other videos how the weather impact is going to affect it in terms of the seasons. The world will actually change between winter, summer, spring and autumn. So that's a wonderful thing, and it seems to be something that they're actually putting a lot of attention into. And one of the reasons that I think it's so welcome, and I'm so pleased about this, is because you perhaps don't expect this in a Kickstarter game, in a crowd-funded game, which is to some extent, even though Stephen has put a huge amount of his own money, it appears, into it. A lot of the Kickstarter games they're cheap. Basically, you can tell they're cheap. I don't mind myself because I quite like some of these niche games, these sort of PvP oriented games, these very sandboxy games, which it seems you can do with Kickstarter, which you can't do with normal studios. Don't seem to want to put the money into it, but you also have to accept slightly lower quality. But what I think we're seeing here with Ashes is in fact what we were hoping for, to be honest, which is a game which does something different, because it is quite niche. It is going to have a big PvP element, it is going to have a big sandboxy element, but in fact it also seems to have the money being put into it to have a huge amount of polish and to actually not only look good, but to have a world which is an interesting world and which is going to change, where you are going to log on and say, well, I've seen this area before, I've been here maybe many times, but I haven't seen it looking quite like this before. This looks a bit different to what I'm used to. Well, what do you think, Narys?
Absolutely, Palmer. It definitely gives me vibes of kind of, I'm sure you'll remember, EverQuest 2. It's, the kind of just the way the world is, the attention to detail, as you say, the changes between day and night, and just, it's just, it is kind of although it's made and produced by a brand new studio and independently, it definitely has that AAA quality feel.
Yeah, I loved EverQuest 2. And you know what I noticed just there? He ran forward and a bunch of birds took off. And those, I don't think, are mobs. They're not monsters you can shoot. Those are just particle effects or whatever. But they weren't flying randomly. It was when he walked forwards into the map, it looked, and I think this was sort of an illusion. I think this was just for flavour. But it looked as if there'd been a load of birds on the ground, and when he ran forwards, they flew away, in fear, as birds would. And that's a lovely little touch. There aren't many games that have that sort of touch. Anyway, let's go back to looking at the combat and watching him shoot things.
Exact that revenge.
Can I? I'm going to cheat here again because I just want to go up to them and give people a look at what these Minotaurs look like in the game.
Yeah.
So
the Terragor is one of those clans or tribes. This one's the Raincaller, who has essence that kind of evokes water. He has water abilities, throws water, attacks, and makes shields of water bubbles around them.
Yeah,
this guy is amazing. Oh, I love the model work.
Eli's done an amazing job on these.
So the monsters,
and these are just a shaman.
The monsters have their own little bit of sort of story, just a little bit of character to them. They're not generic. Well, there's so many games where the truth is that all the enemies, apart from maybe the bosses, are the same really, and just different models. But they seem to be doing something slightly different with this.
Distance, and I see this giant tower structure.
Yeah,
what's this?
The Tower of Carfin, under a curse that is causing a lot of problems for the area too.
Oh, you're right. Actually, I think if we approach up here, we actually cross over into the boundary of Carfin, the wreckage of Carfin, right? It's like
correct. Yeah. And Carfin was one of the great cities of the Alien Empire, and it's now in ruin.
Ooh, there we go. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I see it. That My Friends that you're seeing off in the distance is in Alpha 2, obviously. And Jeremy, tell us a little bit about the tower and what.
Yeah, let's hear this.
Little bit, nothing give away too much, but just a little bit about the tower. What is it? What is the tower from a player's perspective?
It was a focus of the mages and study of the Alien Empire. Carfin was a city that kind of had a great mage population, so it had a university there, and things went bad there during the last days of the fall. They made some desperate measures in a really awesome quest series that Scott's written up and implemented and things.
Awesome. So it's going to be a pretty fun tower that is intended for many groups to exist within and fight. Now, Trad.
Yeah, that's another thing that I'm looking forward to. The reference there to mini groups existing, and I don't think he necessarily means by that a sort of a raid, although he might do. I think what he probably means is that you can have a lot of different groups, as in people who are doing group content, all going into this big sort of dungeon area and coexisting in the same space, which is something you mentioned EverQuest 2. I think you know now I'm a huge fan of EverQuest 2. I'm always trying to convince you and others to play EverQuest 2 with me. Sadly, it's an old game, so a lot of people don't want to play old games. But what I love about that is the shared world and the shared dungeons, and the idea that you can go on a big dungeon crawl, not like you have in a lot of newer MMOs where it's an instance and it's you just go in a straight line and there are sort of 5 or 6 bosses and then you've done a dungeon and the only people you're ever going to see are your own group, because there aren't any other groups in there because it's an instance. What we're going to see in Ashes, as I understand it, is big sort of places where you can go on a proper dungeon crawl and explore, and lots of different groups can be in it at the same time, which is fun because you see other players. It can lead to a bit of conflict. Maybe there are other people who are stealing your mobs, and bizarrely, not everybody likes this. I like that. I like having a bit of a fight and a bit of aggro with other players. I think that all adds to the fun, and from what I think he just said, we might actually get to explore that tower in the Alpha 2, which is really exciting because we are hoping, maybe we'll talk about this in a few minutes perhaps, we're hoping to get some Alpha 2 later this year. We're not going to have to wait for next year. It may happen as soon as this year, so that's really good news. What do you think? Do you have any thoughts? Do you prefer open plan dungeons, or are you a fan of instances?
No, I must admit I'm with you on this, Palmer. It does remind me of, like you said, EverQuest 2 in places like the ruins of Varsoon with the open world dungeons, and kind of even parts of Age of Conan with the open world dungeons as well, like the Tortage Underhalls. And there was a dungeon in Cochetta, I can't remember the name of it. And it just made it interesting. It was kind of risky against the mobs, but it was also risky against other players as well. And it kind of brought together PvEers, PvPers, and it just made the experience. It added to the risk and reward, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Age of Conan was a great game. And that's another thing. I mean, I don't know. I don't think Hand of Unity is necessarily going to be going out just to sort of murder people for the fun of it, but we want to be a sort of political force in the game, don't we? We want to own some territory, maybe own a castle. We still making our plans, and perhaps you don't want to give away all our plans, but we definitely want to be a big force in the game. Other people are going to want to do that too. Other big organized guilds are going to have the same idea, and we may be in conflict with them. So there's a possibility that if we're out in one of these sort of big dungeon areas, one of these places which are going to be sort of a big PvE focus, we're going to come across enemies, and there's going to be scope there for some sort of, what's the phrase that people use, some emergent gameplay, as they say, a bit of fighting when you might not necessarily go out there looking for a fight, but anything can happen. It's going to be a little bit unpredictable, so I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I mean, it takes you back to kind of the time where, well, when you and I used to kind of farm in Hasler with the guild, and you'd kind of be farming away to get your tokens for your weapons, and then out of nowhere, 200 enemies would pop up from the enemy faction, or 50 enemies would pop up from your own faction to try and kill you and kind of take your farming spot. And it kind of made it interesting, because if you were just sat there for hours and hours just killing mobs repeatedly, it wasn't that much fun. But that danger and that kind of constantly kind of having eyes in your back of your head, it made it interesting. Like you say, it was emergent gameplay.
Got you. It's hitting you with those water bolts.
Oh, that's kind of cool. So I can jump while shooting this. Now just imagine that I have a lot more health. Nobody look at the health. Don't look at.
How does Stephen, I mean, he's the boss in this. How is he doing this for the first time, realizing for the first time that he can jump while shooting? It just seems amazing. I mean, I love him. It just seems slightly odd to me that he doesn't seem to have played this class before he's doing the sort of public demonstration. But I do love him. I think he's great.
Correct.
It reminds me of Trial Worlds, if you can remember one of the community managers, Scapes. He would always, kill himself through full damage or jump down a wrong hole or something like that. And, it was entertaining, but it was a lot of fun. I know what you mean.
Each of the basic attacks. Is that correct?
Yep.
And doing so, what does that do for the weapon user?
Oh, hang on, let's go back a little bit. Let's go back a little bit.
Increase, but
Now they fly away. Look at that. The birds are flying.
Yeah, that's right. The birds,
Something
we
cool
said.
about the longbow is that as opposed to the short bow, you are able to actually hold and charge each of the basic attacks. Is that correct?
Yep.
And doing so, what does that do for the weapon user?
Currently, it's just a damage increase, but we can do all sorts of things with this later. Like if you're charging it up longer, then you can set up some kind of status effect combo. There's all kinds of things that we can do with it. But yeah, right now, it just increases the damage. And so, for example, one thing you could do is you could do 2 basic shots and then charge the final shot, and that would give you like a big spike of damage there at the end. So
that's cool.
Be charged individually.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And now we have some abilities that we talked about. These are from the Ranger archetype. Of course, we're not going to show everything that the Ranger has, but we are going to give you guys some ideas of the abilities in its kit. What is this first ability called? This is Snipe?
Right.
Yeah, this is Snipe. This is the one I was talking about earlier, where it's kind of like the basic attack, but a lot more powerful. You can hold this, and when you see that little flash there at the end, that indicates that it's fully charged.
That's a strong ability.
Yeah, you can keep holding it in case you want to wait for the target to get low before you bring them down if they're getting healed. All kinds of things that you can do, but after a certain point, it stops getting charged and it reaches max damage.
Oh, that's cool.
He's healing.
He's healing. Now what happens? Let's get into that environment where I'm getting chased by a few creatures. Hold on. Let's see if I can find a couple more, because I know there's another ability we have called Airstrike, which is kind of cool.
Oh, let's see this.
Let's see.
Really cool.
So now let's say, for example, as the Ranger, I have these creatures, and this melee guy is on me, and I want to reposition. Tell me a little bit about what Airstrike does.
Airstrike does a lot of things. It moves the character in the direction that you're facing, and it rains 3 projectiles down in the path that you're going. And each of those projectiles does damage, AoE, and also the targets. So you could think of this more as like, not quite an ultimate ability, but it's definitely up there.
Yeah, that ability is so rad. I love using it.
You can see it's channeling nature essence to cause roots to come up and vines to grab the Minotaur and hold them.
And now this quick shot ability, by the way, that I see it has a debuff that looks like the quick shot icon on the target. What's that doing?
So basically, each shot of quick shot will increase the damage of the next application of that specific attack against the target. So it kind of encourages to unload all 3 of your charges for a big spike of burst damage, but that does come at the cost of each charge comes back individually. So you either have to wait a longer period of time to get that burst, or you can just kind of weave them in here and there if you want more readily available damage.
Yeah, so I love the way that there's a bit more to it than just using the hotkeys, pressing your 1, 2, 3 button. There are issues such as in some cases, if you charge up an ability, it will last for longer. And also, I think they said it depends on the weapon you use, but if you charge up your basic attack, then with the right weapon, that will actually become a stronger attack. But obviously, it takes longer to use. So, what do you make of the gameplay for the Ranger? Do you think that this is going to be a good class to play?
So, I mean, personally, for me, Palmer, as you know, I'm into healers. I'm definitely going to main cleric in Ashes of Creation, but it's still interesting to see the other archetypes that, you can potentially combine cleric with. For me, I think with the Ranger is in, a very good place. I know it's early days, but the one thing that really stands out to me is the versatility and the options. So, even with the kind of longbow and the short bow, there are 2 different play styles that you can kind of tailor. And even in terms of the abilities, you can choose to charge up the attacks, or you can just go for kind of, quick hits. So overall, I think it's really nice to see those options. And I think, there's some solid foundations. How about you?
Yeah, no, I like it. I'm really pleased with it. And of course, we saw in the last video some of the melee combat. I'm looking forward to seeing what they've done. Well, next time we're going to see the cleric, which is going to be great for you. But so we've seen melee combat and range combat. And I mean, in very general terms, when we played, because you and I were both in Alpha 1 and various sort of pre-alpha testing, the combat wasn't great, was it? The combat wasn't great, but what we're seeing now looks a lot more positive. It actually looks as if they've really got their act together on the combat, I think.
It's definitely more fleshed out. It's kind of come together, and I'd have no qualms with using this combat system on a daily basis for years, personally.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the Bard, which is a character I'm looking forward to playing. I'm assuming that's going to be melee combat, maybe a bit sort of roguish, mixed in with buffing. Bards in a lot of games tend to be kind of like rogues, but with some added sort of buffing abilities for their party, maybe debuffing, maybe a bit of healing perhaps, but we'll see. And with the cleric, I mean, you get the impression that they are interested in making the combat more interesting than just here are your hotkeys, here are your cooldowns. So there may be some sort of additional mechanic or element to it. Do you have any idea? Have you sort of seen anything from Stephen so far about? Because I mean, you watch all these videos the same as I do, but have you seen anything about how the cleric might play? How do you think it's going to play?
So speaking kind of on a non-NTA term, I must admit from playing Cleric throughout the kind of non-NDA testing phases, it was quite interesting to see how the classes evolved. Initially the experience wasn't a particularly great one. The heals didn't make sense. They didn't have a good logic and rhythm. But then after a couple of passes, the Cleric, really was a fun class to play. It had, a widely varied toolkit. You had single target heals, AoE heals. And to me anyway, it seems as if Stephen is going for very much a kind of positioning-based healing stance. So the kind of things that we've seen in other games like Arcade, with Songcraft and Vitalism, and also, I know it sounds silly, but also in terms of FPS, it's like Overwatch with heroes like Mercy and Lucio. It's, about positioning yourself in the correct area to be effective, to avoid damage as much as possible, and it's definitely a more kind of tactile and feedback-based healing style rather than just standing there and pushing buttons.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as a lot of people will know, that there was no NDA on the last alpha test, or well, at least not the final alpha test, and there won't be any NDA in the future alpha test. You're one of these people who spent huge sums of money, and it's possible that you have access to more information, even than those of us who paid for Alpha 1 like me, but you're not allowed to even to tell us if you do have any extra information. Maybe you don't, who knows? Shall we talk a little bit about some of the things that Stephen said recently in the Ask Me Anything video which he made, which we're not going to play that whole video. It's quite long, it's very interesting, but he did say some quite interesting things. So he said, amongst other things, how much he talked about server merges. I guess we won't go into that one right now. What work or milestones still needs to be completed before Alpha 2 launch? He said Alpha 2 involves adding content to core systems that you've previously seen. In other words, it looks like when Alpha 2 does happen, there's going to be quite a lot going on. It's not because Alpha 1 really was quite basic, and it was just there were some quests. There was a basic node system where you could develop a node. There was a caravan system, but the caravan system didn't really work, and there was some combat. But they're going to add in, he says Alpha 2 is going to be a mix of theme park and sandbox content. There's a fair amount that needs to be curated content for Alpha 2. So we're going to see not just a different world, and I think what we're seeing here in this video is basically the world that we're going to see in Alpha 2, but more core systems. Are you fairly pleased with that? Are you looking forward to that?
Absolutely, Palmer. So Alpha 1, like you said, it was very bare bones. It was almost like the kind of skeletal structure of the game. And it's nice to hear that they now are putting the kind of flesh or the meat on those bones to really pad it out and add that extra content and those extra features they promised.
Each archetype, and I think the archetype is the sort of main class. Is that right? So obviously you got, I can't remember the names of the classes offhand, but you've got sort of rogue, warrior, cleric. Those are the archetypes, and then the actual classes are your sort of hybrids. So you can have like mage stroke rogue, which would be a class, but the archetype would be mage in that case. Have I got this right? Have I understood this?
Yep, so to my knowledge, you kind of have your primary archetype and your secondary archetype. So, for example, you could combine a tank with a fighter or a cleric with a mage, and the secondary archetype tends to augment your primary archetype skills. So it doesn't give you entirely new ones, it will just change how the existing ones work.
So Stephen says each archetype will have an average 35 to 40 abilities. Some will have more than others. Also, your number of abilities in terms of sort of active abilities will depend on the player to some extent, because you can choose to put more skills into passives if you like, or you can choose to put more skill points into active abilities. But it sounds like you're going to have anything up to 40 active abilities to choose from, and every ability, they say, is going to be useful. None of them are going to be obsolete, so there will be some real choices there. What do you make of that?
Personally, for me, it's a positive. I must admit, I'm not a huge fan of games that have really simplified down the number of abilities you have. So kind of games like Elder Scrolls Online or Guild Wars 2. I really do prefer having, lots of skills available to choose from, lots of skills available to use, and then choosing the skills based upon the situation. How about you, Palmer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea that you have to choose, even if there's a limit to the number you can put on your hotbar, the idea that you have to choose how many to put on your hotbar is, I think preparing for combat, preparing for battle is an important part of the game, and it should be like one of the skills that you need to have in the game. And of course, it gives you a bit of variety because maybe you can do different things. And then during combat, the idea that you have more than just 2 or 3 different abilities to choose from, and actually have a few more to choose from, is a wonderful thing. I remember when I first started playing World of Warcraft, when the game first came out, because that's how old I am, one thing that really disappointed me was the fact that there were so few abilities to choose from in the game, compared to EverQuest 2. So, yeah, but I mean, the difficulty, the big danger with having lots of skills is that people decide that some of them are no good, and everybody says, well, actually there are 30 skills, but there's only 5 or 6 that you need. I often find that this is an issue not with games but with gaming communities where people decide that there's a meta, and then people decide that, well, everybody should follow the meta. Sometimes that's just wrong. Sometimes actually there are options and there are choices and there are different play styles which are equally valid. But somebody writes a guide and everybody says, oh, well, we all need to follow that guide, and if you're not doing it, then you're a very silly person. So I think sometimes it's not a problem with games, it's actually a problem with the way that gamers behave, and there might be options and there might be different ways of doing things. But yeah, I like having lots of skills. So in this Ask Me Anything, Stephen said that we should get. I think. Oh well, I'll move on to this because I don't want to get this wrong. He said that we can expect to see the secondary archetypes to some extent in Alpha 2, which is fantastic. So we'll get more than just a limited number of classes. We'll get the ability to customize the classes with the secondary archetypes, which is great. And he said that we will be having that Intrepid developers will be having spot tests this year. Over the next several months, we plan to do some NDA spot testing for the testers. And specifically, when asked, will we get Alpha 2 spot tests this year, he said yes. Once the dates have been locked in, you will be receiving emails if you have access to those respective tests. I'm not sure he quite promised for certain that we will get Alpha 2 testing this year, but he certainly made it sound as if we will get some basic Alpha 2 testing this year. What do you think about this? Are you hopeful that we will get to play Alpha 2 before the new year?
Must admit, kind of in terms of the hype and the copium talking, I love to play Alpha 2 as soon as possible. But to be honest with you, I really just want them to take their time with the game, because I'd much rather it be ready when it comes out and, take a few extra months than be kind of rushed, released a little bit earlier and kind of be buggy. So, for me, I'm hopeful, but I'd be quite understanding if it didn't come out until early next year.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And he was also asked about the classes we might see in Alpha 2, and he was asked about Summoner, Cleric, Mage, Rogue, Bard, and he said you will see some of these classes before Alpha 2 begins. I think what he means is we'll see them in sort of video form, like the video we're watching right now. A lot of it is the combat feel, the movement, the weapon usage, the ability system, and so much more. After the design and engineering, there's a lot of art that's required to make these abilities feel good and sound good. And one of the great things about the Rangers, as I said, is that I think it does sound really good when they're using the bow. There's a fantastic noise when they fire the arrow, and also when it hits a target. Excuse me, I'm sort of I've got the hiccups, and also when it hits the target. So he says we've got a lot more to do. There's a long pipeline, but we're doing pretty good on the progress front. So we will see more classes before Alpha 2. And before I ask you for your thoughts on that, let's just go back to talking about the cleric, because he was asked about, well, healing skills in general, not the cleric classes, might apply to others, healers too. And as he said, he as a gamer, he said he likes the idea of needing to conserve his mana and manage his healing rotations. But he also said it's important, in his view, what they're developing is some sort of action combat healing system where aiming healing skills in a line path trajectory or proximity based heals that rely on positioning, or formation type skills where players must be directionally positioned behind, for example, a tank in order to be healed, contribute towards a compelling and engaging combat system. So there's going to be more to it than just pressing the buttons, not just from the healer's point of view, but also from the point of view of the other members of the party. If they want to be healed, they're going to need to stand in the right place, and actually it sounds like the tank and the healer are both going to have a role to play in positioning their party and understanding where the party is positioned, how the party should be positioned for maximum healing, and that's going to be a big part of being effective in a group. So that sounds like a lot of fun, but quite a big challenge for someone like you now, as he wants to play a healer.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that, during the first 20 levels in first dungeon, a lot of players will struggle with because it's quite different to other modern MMOs. But yeah, I think it's something that makes the class kind of, easy to kind of get into, but very difficult to master. And I think it's something like that that keeps it interesting. And, it does cause that meta to vary slightly as people discover new ways of doing things and new tactics and strategies. But yeah, I'm, really excited. I think the cleric's in a good place already, and it still has a lot of development time to come. So for me, this healing system is really a dream come true.
Yeah, I'm quite excited about all of this. I was never that bothered about the combat in Ashes. What I was attracted to in Ashes was the sandboxy elements, the territory control elements, the fact that it sounds like it's going to have a fantastic crafting system, because I like crafting. I like a player-driven economy where the best gear comes from crafting in so many. New World, real disappointment to me, New World. It actually has a really great crafting system, but then by far and away the easiest way to get good gear is just from doing PvE, and in fact maybe from doing PvE from getting those loyalty points. And I think the very best in slot gear probably is crafted, but the effort required, the amount of effort required to get the very best in slot crafted gear is so high, and the benefit is so small. Really, a lot of crafting doesn't have the value that it should have in New World, whereas here in Ashes it sounds as if crafting and the economy, because it's not all about crafting as such, it's also the economy, gathering resources, knowing where resources come from, maybe a little work storing resources. It's going to have warehouses in this game, and it looks like warehouses are actually going to be important. All of that I was really excited about, and I just thought the combat, not too bothered, don't care that much. Turns out actually that the combat looks like it's going to be good as well. So that's a fantastic sort of added bonus to me, that the combat is actually going to be interesting. So I'm really excited about this game. So I think we'll finish up here. But Narys, what are your thoughts? What do you want to finish up by saying?
Well, personally, for me, I just want to say, it's nice to see after all these years of kind of since I backed the game, that the game is progressing. Stephen's delivering on what he's promised. And, there's evidence out there now which will kind of put a lot of the naysayers to bed. Don't get me wrong, I know it's risky. PC game development and kickstarting projects is risky, but we are getting there step by step. And I'm really excited to see the cleric next time.
Fantastic. I'm going to get a lot of stick. People are going to tell me off. They're going to say, we wanted to see Narys' face. You promised us. We did promise some people that we'd get your face on the screen. We've still failed to do it. So next time, this is the cast iron promise that we will get Narys' face on screen. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Palmer. I've been joined by Narys, the leader of the Hand of Unity community. If you want to join a fantastic Ashes guild, we also play lots of other games too, by the way. Take a look at Hand of Unity. There'll be a link to our website and our Discord and whatever in the description of this video. Or if you're from a rival guild, you can hop onto our Discord and just say hello. We'd be delighted to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed this reaction. And we'll be back next time for some more Ashes of Creation NP React. Thank you very much indeed.